In 25 years of televised justice, Judge Judy Sheindlin has faced arrogance, lies, and every flavor of courtroom drama imaginable. But what happened on one quiet Thursday morning wasn't just another case, it was fate walking straight through the courtroom doors. This wasn't about a spoiled Karen or a rich kid mouthing off to authority. This was about a man who once swore he'd destroy her life, unknowingly stepping right back into her courtroom, face to face with the woman he'd threatened to silence. It began like any other day. The studio lights glared, the cameras rolled, and the audience shuffled into their seats waiting for another dose of reality justice. But behind that calm routine, something dark was about to surface. Months before that taping, Judge Judy and her family had become the target of a series of vicious, anonymous letters. The messages were filled with rage, threats, and an obsession that sent chills through her entire production team. Someone out there knew where her family lived, where her grandchildren went to school, what time she walked her dog. It was personal, calculated, and cruel. The kind of thing that could break anyone's sense of safety. The LAPD and federal authorities were quietly investigating, but the sender was smart, untraceable return addresses, different names every time, postmarks from several states. Whoever it was, they wanted to stay invisible. Judy never spoke publicly about it. She kept filming, kept smiling, kept delivering justice to strangers, even as she received death threats at home. Because that's who she is, unshaken. But deep down, even she knew, whoever was behind those letters wasn't finished. And then, months later, it happened. A random civil case was added to the schedule, nothing special. A landlord suing a former tenant for property damage. A typical episode. The producers prepped the paperwork, checked the names, and rolled cameras. But none of them, not one person in that studio, realized the man walking toward the plaintiff's podium was the same man who had been tormenting their judge. They say karma moves quietly, and on that morning, it moved straight through those courtroom doors. He walked in calm, confident, holding his documents with a smirk that said he'd done this before. He had no idea that every step he took was pulling him closer to the woman whose patience he had poisoned for months. When Judy entered the courtroom, the crowd clapped as usual. But as she sat down, there was a flicker, just the slightest shift in her eyes. Something about him felt familiar. The tone of his face, the cadence of his voice when he greeted her. A sense she couldn't quite name. For a brief second, it was like she'd seen a ghost wearing a cheap suit. The case began like any other. But as he spoke, certain words rolled off his tongue with eerie precision. Phrases she'd read before. Sentences that matched the letters almost word for word. Her instincts, honed by decades of dissecting lies, started to buzz. She leaned forward slightly, watching him closer, her expression calm, but her mind racing. Could it be him? No. Impossible. What were the odds? Little did she know, that very envelope of evidence sitting on her desk held the handwriting that would confirm everything. The same angular strokes. The same twisted capital letters. The same mark of obsession that had haunted her family for months. It was right there, in plain sight. As the defendant rambled about unpaid rent and unfair treatment, Judy's attention drifted. She wasn't just listening, she was studying. Every word, every glance, every nervous flicker in his hands. The energy in the room had changed. Viewers wouldn't have noticed yet, but behind that sharp judicial stare, Judy had already begun connecting the dots. What the audience didn't know, and what even he didn't realize, was that his time was running out. Because when Judge Judy senses deceit, it's only a matter of minutes before she turns it inside out. And here's where the story becomes legend. The man who once wrote threats about seeing her fall was now standing in front of her, calm, smug, and unaware that the woman he tried to intimidate was about to dismantle him without raising her voice. This wasn't just justice. This was destiny. And the irony was almost biblical. He wanted her attention, and now he had it, more than he could ever handle. If you've ever believed that karma has perfect timing, that life has a way of circling back when you least expect it, hit that like button right now, because what you're about to hear next might be the most satisfying twist in courtroom history. Because in just a few minutes, Judge Judy will discover exactly who he is. And when she does, what comes out of her mouth will silence an entire courtroom. His name was Calvin Dorsey, 48 years old, unemployed, angry, and obsessed. He wasn't a criminal mastermind or a professional con man. He was just one of those people who couldn't handle losing, especially not in front of millions of viewers. 2 years before the morning he walked into Judy's courtroom, Calvin had been a defendant on a minor civil case, something about unpaid rent and property damage. The case itself was unremarkable. But the moment Judge Judy called him delusional, it became television gold. That clip went viral across social media, replayed, remixed, and ridiculed until Calvin Dorsey's face became a meme, the man who thought he could out-talk Judge Judy and failed miserably. For Judy, it was another day at work. For Calvin, it was the start of an obsession. The internet laughed at him. His boss saw the video, his friends teased him, and his girlfriend left him weeks later. Every time he searched his name online, he saw the same headline, Judy destroys Calvin. The humiliation festered. What began as embarrassment turned into bitterness. Then bitterness turned into hate. And soon, that hate found its way onto paper. It started small. One letter, mailed to the show's production office, written in all capital letters with no return address. Then came another. And another. Within months, the staff had received nearly 20. Some mocked her, some threatened her, and some described her family in disturbing detail. The handwriting was jagged, erratic, angry. The kind of writing that looked like it had been carved more than written. At first, Judy brushed it off. After all, she'd been criticized before. But when one envelope arrived with the address of her grandchildren's school scrawled across the top, that changed everything. It wasn't just professional anymore. It was personal. The kind of fear that doesn't come from fame but from realizing someone out there is watching you too closely. The production called the LAPD, who then looped in the FBI's cyber threat unit. The letters had been mailed from different states, each using a fake name, each designed to look random. But investigators noticed a pattern, the same type of pen, the same stationery, and one chilling signature, a shaky smiley face drawn under every name. Even the staff felt it. They began checking mail twice, locking doors earlier, watching unfamiliar faces in the audience. What used to be the country's most light-hearted courtroom now had a shadow hanging over it. And through it all, Judy kept working. She refused to back down, even when her security detail urged her to take a break. She smiled for the cameras, handed down verdicts, and hid her worry behind that unshakable stare. The threats escalated, the tone darker, the handwriting more desperate. He wasn't just trying to frighten her anymore, he wanted her to feel hunted. "You took my life," one letter read, "so I'll take yours." Another said, "You think you're safe behind that bench. I'll show you how wrong you are." It wasn't just an attack on a celebrity judge. It was an attack on a mother, a grandmother, a woman whose family had never asked for the spotlight. He didn't just target a public figure, he tried to scare a grandmother. And that was the biggest mistake of his life. Because when you push someone like Judy Sheindlin into a corner, she doesn't hide, she calculates. She waits. She remembers. And when the day comes, she strikes with precision. And if you respect people who protect their family no matter what, subscribe right now, because what Judy did next wasn't just justice, it was personal revenge served cold on live television. Months passed. The investigation had slowed, the letters had stopped, and the show had returned to its usual rhythm of petty lawsuits and viral courtroom moments. Judge Judy remained unshaken, still sharp, still relentless, but behind the scenes, security stayed on edge. The threat had vanished without closure, and everyone silently prayed that the man behind it had finally moved on. But fate doesn't forget. It waits. It was a quiet Tuesday when the production team received a new case file, Landlord vs. Tenant, Calvin Dorsey. The name meant nothing to most of the staff. Hundreds of cases passed through those halls every season. Another small claim. Another angry dispute. But one assistant, Judy's longtime aide, Marla, froze when she saw the name on the schedule. Something about it made her uneasy. She couldn't place why. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe paranoia. Still, she made a note in her binder. Filming began as usual. Cameras set, microphones live, the bailiff called out the next case. The audience clapped politely as two litigants entered, the landlord first, then the tenant. The man held a stack of papers clutched tightly in one hand, the other shoved into his jacket pocket. His stride was confident, even smug. He looked around the room like he'd been there before. And technically, he had. He walked right up to the defendant's podium, placed his documents on the table, and waited. To anyone else, he was just another face in another case. But when Marla glanced at the envelope he'd brought, the way the name, Judge Judy Production, was written in hard, angular letters, her stomach dropped. It was identical. The slanted capital J. The looping D. The same shaky smiley face etched in the corner of the page. Her pulse quickened. She leaned toward another producer and whispered, "Does that handwriting look familiar to you?" The other producer's face went pale. A quiet murmur rippled through the control room as they zoomed in on the document camera feed. The resemblance was undeniable. It was him. The man who had been sending those threats for months, now standing 3 feet from the woman he'd targeted. Panic rose backstage. One producer reached for the phone, contacting their LAPD liaison, who immediately patched in the FBI contact assigned to the original case. They ran the name. Within minutes, confirmation came back, the handwriting, the alias, the address history, all matched. It wasn't coincidence. It was the same Calvin Dorsey. Meanwhile, Judy was already mid-case. Unaware. Focused. She listened as he argued about a deposit refund, cutting him off with that signature tone, direct, clipped, commanding. The irony was breathtaking. The man who had spent months writing threats about destroying her, was now voluntarily standing before her, pleading his side like every other defendant who thought they could out-talk her. Backstage, staff whispered frantically, debating whether to interrupt filming. But before they could act, Judy turned a page in his evidence packet and saw it, the same strange punctuation, the same phrasing. Her eyes narrowed for just a second. Instinct kicked in. Something felt wrong. By the time security confirmed the truth, it was too late. Cameras were rolling. The man who had terrorized her family was already standing in her courtroom, staring right at her bench, unaware that his past had just caught up with him. And the most haunting part? He still thought this was just another case. He had no idea that this time, he was the one about to be judged. The hearing began like every other, 2 disputing parties, a packed courtroom, and cameras rolling. But within moments of Calvin Dorsey opening his mouth, something in the air changed. His tone was calm, almost rehearsed, every word deliberate, every pause strangely familiar. He spoke with that same cold rhythm that had haunted Judy's nights for months, the same sharp phrasing from those letters, the same quiet venom disguised as confidence. Judge Judy tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing just enough to betray curiosity. The audience wouldn't notice it, but her longtime viewers would have seen it before, that instinct, that split-second flicker she gets when she smells a lie. Her hands rested on the bench, fingers motionless, but her mind was running at lightning speed. As Calvin continued to argue, Judy's attention drifted from the words to the man himself. The slant in his voice, the sarcastic way he emphasized her name, the faint smirk when he said, "Your Honor." Her memory clicked like a locked drawer opening after years. She had read that tone. In ink. On the same yellowed paper that carried those threats. She cut him off mid-sentence, her voice calm but icy. "Mr. Dorsey, could you repeat what you just said?" He hesitated, repeating his line, "You think you're untouchable because of this show." Her eyes didn't blink. She leaned forward slightly, studying him, then said quietly, "I've heard that before." The words hung in the air like static. He froze for half a second, barely perceptible, but Judy noticed. The audience didn't yet understand what was happening, but Calvin's expression changed. A flicker of realization, a flash of panic that he quickly buried. For the next few moments, Judy said nothing. She just watched him. Every time he spoke, she listened less to his defense and more to the echo of his letters in his speech. It was all there, the resentment, the self-pity, the obsession with power. She knew. Without breaking eye contact, she made a subtle hand signal to the bailiff, a silent instruction to stand ready. The bailiff nodded, shifting his position slightly. Judy's demeanor didn't break, she continued questioning him, her tone composed, but now every question was sharper, every glance colder. Calvin didn't realize it yet, but the dynamic in that room had shifted completely. He wasn't talking to the judge of a small claims case anymore. He was standing before the woman he'd been hunting in the dark, and she had finally spotted her prey. The silence that followed was suffocating. You could almost hear the hum of the lights. Judy rested her chin on one hand, eyes locked on him, and said with deliberate precision, "You know, Mr. Dorsey, you remind me of someone who once liked to write me letters." The color drained from his face. His voice caught for the first time. And in that moment, everyone in that room, the bailiff, the staff, the audience, felt it, the storm beneath Judy's calm. That's when Judge Judy turned from judge, to hunter. The FBI confirmation came in through a quiet text message on the producer's phone, "It's him." The handwriting, the pattern, the alias, everything matched. Calvin Dorsey, the man who had threatened Judge Judy's family for months, was standing 3 feet away, calmly arguing about a rent deposit as if his past didn't exist. The control room went silent. The staff could barely breathe. But Judge Judy? She didn't flinch. She kept her poise, her tone steady, her eyes fixed on him like a surgeon studying a patient before making the first cut. She let him talk. She let him dig himself deeper with every smug sentence. Then, slowly, she reached for one of the documents he had submitted as evidence, a printed statement attached to the case. It wasn't just any page, it was written in the same handwriting that had haunted her family's mornings. Judy lifted the paper, adjusting her glasses, and read aloud one line, word for word, straight from the letters he had sent. "You think your fame can protect you," she said, her voice calm, deliberate, dangerous. Calvin's eyes twitched. He snapped, "I never said that." Judy's head tilted slightly, the hint of a smile forming. "Yes," she replied, "you did. You signed it." For a second, the entire room froze. The audience stared, confused. The producers stared through the glass, hands shaking. The bailiff took a single step forward, sensing the change in the air. And Calvin, the man who had once promised to make her feel fear, stood speechless, realizing the trap had been waiting for him all along. Judge Judy leaned forward, elbows on the bench, eyes locked on his. "Mr. Dorsey," she said softly, "you said you wanted to meet me face to face." A long pause followed, her voice sharpening with each word. "Well, congratulations." The impact hit like a thunderclap. The audience gasped. The bailiff closed in. Calvin's face went pale, the confidence draining from him as realization took over. He wasn't just exposed, he was finished. What he thought was a small civil hearing had turned into a live confession, caught on national television. That single exchange would become one of the most replayed moments in courtroom history. 6 seconds of pure poetic justice, the hunter caught by his own arrogance, the victim reclaiming her power without a single shout. Judy didn't gloat, didn't raise her voice. She just let the truth speak for itself. As officers quietly entered the set to escort Calvin out, Judy sat back, composed, untouchable. In her silence was victory, calm, earned, absolute. She had waited months for this moment, and when it came, she didn't explode. She executed. If that gave you chills, smash that like button right now, because what comes next proves exactly why Judge Judy is the most fearless woman in television history, and why justice always finds its way home. The moment Judge Judy delivered that final line, the courtroom froze in a silence so deep you could almost hear hearts pounding. Calvin Dorsey, once the man who had written threats promising revenge, stood completely still, his eyes wide, his breath uneven, his confidence evaporated. The bailiff moved closer, hand ready, as 2 uniformed LAPD officers entered the set from the side door. There was no shouting, no chaos. Just calm, methodical justice unfolding in front of the cameras. "Mr. Dorsey," Judy said evenly, "your case is over." Those words weren't part of the show, they were a verdict on his life. The officers stepped forward and placed handcuffs on him right there at the defendant's podium. Gasps filled the courtroom. The audience didn't know what they were witnessing, a real arrest, not a scripted moment, not a dramatization. This was the man who had threatened one of America's most famous judges, finally caught by the very system he mocked. Backstage, the producers exhaled for the first time in 20 minutes. FBI agents entered moments later, confirming what Judy had already sensed, the handwriting matched perfectly. His fingerprints were lifted from several of the threat envelopes, each tied to different states, each carrying his unmistakable writing style. Dozens of letters, all signed with that same crooked smiley face, were traced back to him. He had mailed them from public post offices, believing anonymity would shield him. But every single one of those lies led him here, to her bench, under her gaze. Calvin Dorsey was charged with interstate harassment, written threats, and obstruction of justice. He was later sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, fined heavily, and ordered to pay restitution for the investigation costs. His mugshot spread across national media within hours. The irony didn't escape anyone. The man who thought he'd humiliate Judge Judy ended up becoming a headline for his own downfall. Within days, the clip of his exposure went viral across every major platform: TikTok, Reddit, YouTube Shorts. Millions replayed the exact moment Judy quoted his threat back to him, frame by frame. Memes flooded the internet, she judged him in every way possible. Hashtags like #JudyJustice, #KarmaServed, and #HeWalkedIntoIt dominated feeds. But what struck viewers most wasn't the arrest, it was her composure. The calmness. The restraint. The way she didn't even raise her voice. Americans flooded the comments, calling her the embodiment of control, the face of real justice, and the woman you never want to underestimate. When interviewed later, Judy said simply, he came to intimidate a woman, and ended up being judged by her. And that, right there, was the full circle. A man who tried to weaponize fear met the one person who couldn't be shaken. He wrote threats in the dark, but she delivered justice in the light. When the dust settled and the cameras stopped rolling, the story of Calvin Dorsey had already transformed into something far bigger than a courtroom moment. It became a living reminder of what justice truly looks like when calm courage meets chaos. Judge Judy didn't just win a case that day, she reclaimed her peace. She proved that courage isn't loud, it's quiet, disciplined, and unstoppable. She proved that justice doesn't always arrive with flashing lights or handcuffs, sometimes it walks in silently, takes its seat, and waits for the right moment to reveal itself. In a world that often rewards outrage, she showed restraint. In a courtroom built for arguments, she showed composure. While others might have shouted or retaliated, she turned the moment into a masterclass of grace under fire. As she later said in an interview, "I don't scare easy. Especially not from people who hide behind paper." That single sentence echoed across America, teachers quoted it, lawyers repeated it, and viewers who had faced their own bullies took comfort in it. Because at its heart, this story isn't just about Judge Judy, it's about what happens when truth finally meets arrogance face to face. You can threaten power, but you can't escape it. You can try to frighten someone righteous, but in the end, your own fear becomes your downfall. Calvin Dorsey thought he was untouchable, that his words would haunt her forever, but instead, they became evidence of his own undoing. There's a kind of poetry to that. He wanted her attention, and now he'll have it replayed for millions of years. Every clip, every meme, every replay of that cold, calm moment will remind the world that real strength doesn't shout, it simply wins. Judy's calm stare that day became more than a reaction, it became a statement. To every person who's ever been intimidated, mocked, or underestimated, she showed that silence can be the loudest victory of all. Justice isn't always about punishment, sometimes it's about peace. And if this story restored even a little of your faith in karma, if it made you believe that the universe still knows how to balance itself, drop a comment right now saying, "Justice served." Because stories like this remind us why truth still matters. Smash that like button so more people see how calm strength defeats cruelty every single time. And don't forget to subscribe, because next, we're covering the lawyer who tried to scam Judge Judy herself, and ended up exposing his own crimes on camera. Because in this courtroom, justice isn't just served, it's remembered.